This conference will now be recorded.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to another one of our speaker series. Today is June 11th, and we're talking with Kira LaFosse Baker, who is one of the lead educators of Home-Based Learning Center, working with young children ages 5 to 9 in nature-based early education programs. Kira has also worked as a lead teacher for a forest kindergarten and as an engagement site manager for the Trustees of Reservations. She's developed and she's been leading public programming in recreational agriculture conservation properties in Eastern Mass. And to talk to you more about it, here's Kira. Thanks for coming. Mouthful.
Well done, Chuck. Well done. And as a disclosure, I also currently work for the Spirit of Adventure Council. So Chuck and I are colleagues. If we seem very friendly, that's because we know each other well. Yeah, so I have had my other big disclaimer that I want to make sure I say here, especially for any parents who are here interested in learning about kind of how nature education and outdoor education may come into play in this kind of brave new world we're all about to face, is that I am by no means a medical expert. I cannot speak to the health benefits with any kind of real clout except my own experience and from what I've read and researched myself. But, there's a lot of great information out there if you are looking for that kind of conclusive evidence-based data to prove that what I have always believed is the right thing is actually a great thing to do. But, there's a lot going on out there right now where people kind of in my camp that are saying, the solution to all this schooling problem is outdoor education and keeping people outside and getting the kids to play outdoors. And I believe all that and I agree with all that, but I am in no position to make any kind of official claims that is true. So I'll just speak to my experience as we talk about this stuff. But I encourage folks to do the research and pay attention to the scientists and medical professionals who are researching that kind of stuff, so that we can make sure we're all getting good, true information to make decisions based on. So like Chuck was saying, I've had kind of a mishmash of history, and I made sure that, I've done a lot of things, and most of them, most recently, have had lots to do with kids and the outdoors. But I've kind of done a little bit of everything. So I was asking earlier if anybody here is here for a merit badge, because I know a lot of merit badges ask about kind of career paths, and mine was weird. I didn't go to school for this. I didn't go to school. There are some wonderful programs out there I highly recommend, even having not been there, but being in this world. Antioch University up in New Hampshire has like a world-renowned environmental education, outdoor education program that many of the best people in this field have come from that school. But I got a Bachelor of Science in Journalism from Suffolk University. I studied public relations. I taught preschool for a little while, but then realized that I wanted to not live with my mom forever. And so I decided to go get a job that paid a little bit better. And I worked in healthcare marketing for three-ish years, and quickly realized that I was not going to be able to sit in a cubicle. That was just not my kind of thing. And from there ended up getting a pretty wonderful job at the Trustees of Reservations, which is an incredible organization, statewide nonprofit, one of the oldest nonprofits in the country. If anybody's ever been over to England or the UK, the National Trust is a wonderful similar organization, actually based off of the trustees. So the trustees did it first, we always like to say, but the National Trust is arguably doing it much better. But they're a whole national organization. So the trustees have, at this point, almost 120 pieces of property all across Massachusetts. And no matter where you live, you probably have one near you. Some of the more popular ones are like Crane Estate up at Ipswich. Down here on the South Shore where I am, there's Weir River Farm, which is a great, beautiful little farm out in Western Mass, Naumkeag. So they have everything from cultural estates to farms, like fully functioning operating farms, to just like beautiful pieces of forest and land that they're protecting and conserving for all people forever. So when I worked for them, I've always been a nature buff and always been pretty connected to the kid in me who just likes to play outside and turn over rocks and find slugs and and see what's happening in the woods. But when I was with the trustees, I really kind of honed that passion and realized how much of a connection it had to that work that I did working with preschoolers and young children, and recognized how important it is to connect kids to nature before it's too late, frankly. I think that, lots of adults could probably tell you that they have kind of lost that connection in a more meaningful way, right? Yeah, they still go camping sometimes and they still, grill outside in their backyard, but they're not as in tune with, when the leaves are popping in the spring and what it means when you're starting to hear the peepers in the woods and things like that. They're not as connected to that stuff. And I'll jump right onto my liberal high horse and say that a lot of that disconnect is where we're ending up with some significant environmental issues in the world today, because people don't think about the environment anymore in the way that they maybe used to. They're not as connected. So my time with the trustees really kind of honed that passion. And then when I left there because I found this incredible opportunity at a school that unfortunately closed after a couple of years of us being there. But this basically a forest kindergarten, which is a concept that is wildly popular in the UK. Outdoor schools have been popular in like places like the Netherlands and Sweden and Finland for a long time. That's just how they've always done it. And so they're finally kind of making their way over here in popularity. And this was an amazing opportunity for me to combine like my love of working with children and my passion for the outdoors into something that I knew was good for kind of my community and for the families that participated in that program. And then when that unfortunately closed, I was lucky enough that happenstance brought me to Chuck's door and a program very similar to the one we were running there, the Home-Based Learning Center, was running out of the New England Base Camp. And we've had a wild ride this year. We were outside for most of it until the very end here. So like Chuck was saying, the program that I'm a part of now is really unique in that it, we call it a school for all intents and purposes, but we're not technically a school. We're a homeschool enrichment program. It's a bit of a, I don't like to say loophole because it makes it sound like we're trying to get away with something, but
it's a community.
Yes, it's a space. It's a space that has not been made official by any kind of organization yet, and we're grateful for that because it lets us do what we really would like to do and what we know is important. And so all of the families that are enrolled in our program are enrolled in homeschooling. And so they have registered with their districts to say they are not sending them to public school. They're going to do it on their own. But we joke a lot that it's not really a homeschool program because they're not doing most of their schooling at home. They're doing most of it with us in the woods at Blue Hills. So the children were a mixed age classroom. We have our youngest is 5, kindergartner, and our oldest is like 8 or 9. She may turn 9 this year. She will this summer. So we've got a nice variety of kids, and it works out beautifully that they all work together and kind of teach each other and learn from each other in the setting of the Blue Hills with kind of nature as our curriculum, which brings me to kind of the concept. So that's kind of what I do and what I've done, but there's a few kind of guiding philosophies that I like to kind of use as my taglines whenever people ask me about what I do and why I do it. And one of them is that I really like doing things the way things used to be done. So I think a lot about, even, and when I say used to be, I mean, sure, as far back as like the 60s and 70s when our parents were out having fun and playing until the streetlights came on, and then you come home and there was definitely a greater sense of independence and things like that. But even further back to like revolutionary times, to settler times, when kids kind of raised each other in communities, and people lived off the land and were much more in tune with the land and connected to what nature had to offer. So I kind of think about how things used to be done, because I think as much as like the fact that if we were still in the times that used to be and a pandemic came along, we wouldn't be able to connect with each other like we have now. Technology is an amazing feat. So we've come a long way in a lot of ways, but we've also lost a lot. And so I think it's great that these kinds of programs are coming up to show people some of the stuff we've lost and reintroduce it to the next generation so that we can hope to balance out kind of the imbalance that has happened. And then kind of my other philosophy is that is sort of this, I really like that we have this multi-age classroom. That's a big piece of this. And I like that we are one of the things that's challenging about a program like ours is that everyone wants to know, like, what's our curriculum? And every time I've tried to go build a curriculum, and if you know education at all, you know, most people write a curriculum. They'll say, all right, we're going to start learning this type of math at the beginning of the year, and then a few months in, we'll learn a different type of math. And then beyond that, you know, then we'll see where people are and we'll kind of go on from there. Or history, right? We're going to learn about this piece of history and then we'll move up in the timeline. When you're working with younger children and you're working in a nature-based program, it's not just nature-based because you're playing outside. It's nature-based because your curriculum is nature, right? So our timeline is in the fall, we're learning about the fall, and in the winter, we're learning about winter, and in spring, it's spring. And all of the things that you need, you know, I think people are always really pleasantly surprised when you kind of think about it and break it down. Everything that most people would argue a young child needs to be learning at those times can be taught with that kind of framework in mind. So, you know, we're learning lots of things about, I mean, science is the obvious one, right? Like we learn, most of my students probably know more about, they could name more trees than most kids in public schools because that's what we're doing. And they know when they leaf out, and they know what kind of diseases impact them, and they know what kind of insects like to hang out on them. And they know, you know, about the food webs and how they break and what that means. And then once that food web gets introduced and we were talking about biology, then you start talking about history, right? My kids all know what happened when we got rid of wolves, right? And why we have a deer population problem, and how it all impacts kind of social studies and history. And then all of this is done outdoors with a journal. So they're still learning writing and they're still learning reading and, you know, phonics and math. It's all right there. You just have to kind of integrate it and let it happen a little bit on its own, right? We're still there as the educators to guide it, but the more, I guess that's a kind of a secondary piece to this, is that it's very much nature-based, but we're also very play-based. So our kids probably spend more time playing than they do sitting and learning from us. But that play, and you'll see this kind of narrative all over the place in kind of my world and my industry, but play is learning. It is 100% learning. I think a lot of scouts know this, right? When you're out camping, you know, we had somebody who said they love camping. Camping, if you step back and look at it through an educational lens, you will see all of the things that are happening, all the learning that's happening there. You're learning about engineering when you have to build a tent. Even if it's a tent that you just have to pull out of a bag, you still have to learn the engineering behind how to assemble that and make sure it's sturdy. You know, you're learning about environmental science when you're figuring out where to put that tent to make sure that you're not too downhill and you're not going to get flooded out at night. You know, you're learning about cooking and chemistry when you're learning about building fires. You're learning, I mean, when you're building tents, when you're building a shelter, you're learning about math. All of these things are happening and you don't even know it, which is the best kind of learning, especially for young children. You know, we've seen there's lots and lots of research out there that says that if you shove this stuff down kids' throats, they don't learn it. And they, you know, there's a lot of, especially reading, there's a lot of research that says if you force a child to learn to read before they are ready to read, they will hate reading for the rest of their life. And you know, this, I know I was going to say, right. I'm still a terrible reader. Not that I was forced to read necessarily, but you know, when you let the learning be when you let the learning come from the child, and when you let them kind of bring it to you and say, I want to learn about this, everything goes so much easier. And when a kid is outdoors playing in the woods and doesn't know that they're learning, that's the smoothest way to do that. So that's a very long-winded intro to my kind of philosophy and the philosophy of a program like ours and others like that. So hopefully that kind of makes sense to folks and isn't too much. I can also, so I know that one of the things I wanted to kind of bring up and talk about, and I said at the beginning, my disclaimer of I'm not a medical professional, but lots of people are very worried right now about what school looks like next year. And that's totally fair, because from what I've read and heard, it looks like kind of a mess, right? It looks like there is no great solution right now to make sure that children and students are comfortable and able to learn well in an environment that is conducive to learning. All that being said, I completely understand that we have to keep people safe, right? So I get it, and I've seen lots of parents out there saying things like, I don't know how you're going to get me, I don't know how you're going to get my kid to keep a mask on all day. I don't know either, but like, and I've got 5-year-olds. I don't know how I'm going to get them to keep a mask on all the time when we need them to, but right now I don't have a better solution. So we're waiting for more guidance, and we're waiting for those experts to, say what is going to work best to keep everybody safe. But the one of the things that seems pretty clear right now is the fact that, like, being indoors in circulated air is certainly less effective at keeping people safe than being outdoors. And so just the fact that, my co-teacher and I are currently working on our plans for next year and how we're going to make sure to keep everybody safe, but it pretty much involves like living like you're going to film on, right? You pack everything with you, and all of our kids are going to have their individual bags of their pencils and pens and notebooks and the things that they need. And we're going to go, hiking. We're going to go out on the trail, and we'll go do, a fun little phonics lesson in the woods. And that'll make it so that maybe we don't have to be wearing masks the entire time, right? The kids can be 6 feet apart, and we're outdoors, and we can spread apart really well. And they can still have this really enriching experience together, but separate. Without maybe having to wear a mask all the time. Whereas if you're indoors, even if you're 6 feet away, even if your desk is 6 feet away from somebody else, you may be asked to wear a mask all the time. And that's just not, I know, I empathize with parents who are trying to figure out how to make that work. I'm seeing Cynthia's question on chat. And I think she's exactly right. It definitely gets harder as they age. But I don't think it's impossible. I think that that's actually a big movement in this kind of nature-based industry, in the outdoor education industry, is that people are realizing, and I think actually, much to Cynthia's point, I think actually it's going to, I think I won't be surprised if we see it happen next year. This is a thing that people in our world have been wanting to see happen in public schools for a long time, but now we have like very clear motivation, which is to start integrating nature-based education into public schools. Public schools, obviously, very traditional, indoors, 20, 30 kids per class. And I know that parents don't love the way that most public education is going these days. If you get a great teacher, you've lucked out, and that's wonderful. But unfortunately, districts are under a lot of pressure to do things a certain way, and they put that pressure onto their teachers as well. But more and more folks, and Chuck and I had this experience at base camp, are saying, hey, one Friday a month, we're wondering if we can come to your program and like shoot some bow and arrows or go for a hike or learn about bugs with you. And we're talking 4th, 5th, 6th graders. So people are taking their science classes and wanting to take them outdoors and get the kids outside and give them an experience that they wouldn't have in their school building. And even then, some people are, right? Lots and lots of schools are starting to adopt like school gardens, community gardens, which is an awesome, easy, simple way. If you are a parent of a child at a public school, I highly encourage you to pose that idea to your school and say, hey, can we just build some raised beds in the, in that tiny little space in the courtyard that's not being used? Because, nature education doesn't mean always playing in the woods. It can very much mean, taking care of a garden, learning what to grow. And there's history there. You can grow a Three Sisters garden, which is like a traditional Native American garden that works beautifully with the seasons, and you can learn a lot about that. You can do, all you need is a maple tree, and you can do maple tapping. It won't always be the greatest maple syrup, but because technically you want like a good maple, but you can tap actually any tree. I highly recommend tapping birch. It's a tasty one. But you can tap a tree on your school's campus and learn about maple sugaring and the history of that, along with the chemistry of it and the science of it. And that there's lots of ways that schools are integrating programs like that into their wider school program, even before they do things like field trips. So, I think, and all that being said, Cynthia asking about if it's like a little bit harder with kids as they get older, and as Chuck and I know, especially when you're working with different populations, especially kids who we've had a couple of groups that come from the city of Boston, and these are kids who do not get out and see bugs very often and are not used to like a lot of dirt. And I hadn't realized that and didn't really think about that, and planned a program with them that involved them crawling around on their hands and knees. They did not want to do that, which I now understand. And the older they get, the harder it is to be like, no, it's okay. Bugs are, there's a few that we really want to avoid, but for the most part, most bugs are okay. So certainly there's going to be a barrier there, but I don't think, I think like with all things, it's never too late to start, right? Like if you're 45 years old and you want to start learning to speak Spanish, start now, right? There's no time like now. It's okay to start late. It will be a little bit harder, but just because it's going to be hard doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. Cynthia also asked about the programs for older ages. I think, and I'll send a list, Chuck, because I think that there's a lot of great programs out there. Most of the programs that I know of are catered towards homeschooling students, just because they're the ones who have time, that they're not in school all the time. But there are also more and more programs that are starting to come into schools. So I actually brought up some books because I knew I was going to want to reference them. Project Wild is an awesome organization. It's part of, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, they're like part of, or they're adapted and integrated by like different states' departments of recreation, I want to say. Conservation and recreation, so like the Mass DCR has used Project Wild to do some public programming. Like I was talking about with the trustees, one of the things I did a lot with them was public programs. So we would do like night hikes and owl walks and fairy house building and things like that for the public to just come and do. And Project Wild has a lot of programs like that, but they have gone so far as to have like a K through 12 curriculum. So teachers, like a public school teacher or a district, can take some of this and try to do it themselves. But also there's people who work for, at least in Massachusetts, this is the case, people who work for the state whose job it is to bring programming to schools. And they have funding for that, and they have things like that. So I think it's probably the kind of thing you have to kind of seek out a little bit and advocate for that to come to your school. But that doesn't, again, might be hard, but it doesn't mean it's not the right thing to do. So I'll see if I can look up, I'll figure out some more programs like that I know kind of travel to schools or do things like that. I think more and more nowadays, there's lots of places that offer kind of those one-off programs. Your local zoo, I can guarantee you, does programming like this. And offers like a weekend course. Mass Audubon is a great one. They offer like a lot of 3-week-long courses or 8-week-long courses in, what did I tell one the other day that I was desperate to take? It was like live animal drawing of owls. So they have owls at their property, and you'd come and learn. It's like an art class, but you're drawing a real owl and you're learning about owls as you're doing it. And so there's places like that, like a Mass Audubon. And there's a ton of these kinds of places. There's a place in, I don't know, where's the heart of New England Council? Help me out.
Right in the middle, in the middle of Massachusetts and a little bit of New Hampshire.
Like Worcester Middle? Lancaster?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll have to look it up, but there's definitely,
to the left of us.
To the left of us. Oh, Leominster, yeah. So, I mean, the trustees do a lot of programs like this, and they have in Leominster, there's a property, although I don't think they do too much programming up there. What's the other property up there that's not a trustee's property? I have such bad baby brain. For those who don't know, I am very, very pregnant due today. And so my brain is not functioning at its best right now. But when I get off this call, I'll type up and look up all the different places. There's a arboretum up in that area, and I can't think of the name of it. Oh yes, near and far, Shirley. Almost got married there. It's a beautiful property. So yeah, seeking out some of those kind of conservation organizations or things like that that have that same mission of getting people outdoors and connecting people to nature. They are more and more offering programs like you might find in a school, but outside of a school setting. And I think it, 3 or 4 years ago, it might have been that they only did programs like in the middle of the day because they thought the only people they could market to was homeschoolers. But nowadays they know that people in public schools want more of this too, and it's not coming to the schools yet. So they're trying to offer it outside of those hours so that other folks can participate. And I know we're talking primarily about children, but there are lots and lots of these places that are doing this for adults too. So like birding has become this massive thing. People are all of a sudden really into birding. And there's lots of awesome birding courses that you can take both for kids and for adults. And I think things like that are going to be, again, with our new pandemic world in mind, things like that are going to be really popular because you can be outdoors on a trail 6 feet apart from somebody or wearing a mask if you need to and be interacting with nature and learning without having to be sitting in a conference room or a classroom. So I think those are going to be really popular things once everyone kind of figures out how to best stay safe while doing it. And that's to say nothing of New England Base Camp, where if you are in our area, we've got lots of programs like that, and Chuck has been working very hard on our kits. So if you're a scout and you're doing scouting, you're working on advancements, and even if you're not, I would say that too is if you are not a scout. Yeah, these are, I grew up with a lot of scouts, but I didn't do scouting myself and have learned so much about scouting and the scouting curriculum while working with this amazing team. And it's really incredible how much it aligns, the scouting curriculum aligns with the outdoor and nature-based programs. So we're really kind of after the same thing, getting people outside, getting kids to be independent. And, as one of our colleagues always says, people of character. We're trying to raise children to be adults of character and to care about the world around them, whether that's the people around them or the physical world around them. And so it really aligns very nicely. And a lot of the work that Base Camp is doing and the Spirit Adventure Council is doing is to make that accessible for people, even in this crazy new time that we're in. So, yeah, I highly recommend, like I said, when we send this out, we can try to send out, we'll make sure we include our kit information because those are awesome.
Now you mentioned crazy time and before how technology is such a great thing now, which is how we're communicating. Your school, which was 90% outside and 10% in a classroom here, is now you're teaching online. Do you feel as though it is as productive teaching online, or can you see maybe less interest through the kids, like maybe cabin fever, like they're itching
Oh,
to get
yeah.
out?
Yeah, and I think kids are so adaptable and so flexible, and they will go with the flow no matter what. But you can definitely, these last couple of weeks, we've noticed it's like a senioritis thing. They have all forgotten how to do math all of a sudden. Miss Judy, my co-teacher, was teaching a math class this morning, and she was like, I swear they could not do 2 + 0. And it's like, and they did it last week, but this week they just can't. And so I think everybody is tapped out. And I think it goes to show that while this is a useful platform, and it's a useful thing to have because we can continue to engage with our students in a lot of ways, it's not the same kind of engagement as we get in person. And we're very lucky that our families have been making sure that our kids are going and playing outside. For a while, one of the classes that I was teaching, I put everything in quotes because it doesn't feel like it's not really a class, and it's not really teaching when you're doing it this way, but at least in my world. But one of the classes I was teaching was called a nature walk, because the kids were just missing being able to go for walks in the woods with me. And so I would take my phone and I would get on Zoom on my phone and go walk around at some local property and just like, oh, check out this mushroom I found. Look at this cool bug, and show them cool stuff. But a handful of weeks ago, it started to get harder for me to go on long nature walks with my giant belly. But also, I realized, I was on one of them, and the kids were like, "Oh wait, go back and show me that. Oh wait, no, go back and show me that." And I realized, this is ridiculous. You should all just be going outside and taking a walk. And like, you're all the painful irony that my nature walk class is you guys all sitting on a screen, staring at a screen while I walk around in nature. That's not how we should be doing this. You guys should get outside. So kind of to answer your question, I think at the beginning it was pretty effective, and we were able to still focus on the academics, which I always also put in quotes because we're very much not an academic heavy program, or when we are, it's supposed to be kind of sneaky academics. They don't know that they're learning things that are academic, and they're having a time because we're doing it through games or we're playing outside. But we focused on more of those things. Our classes were like, we did a phonics class, we did a writing class, we did a math class, we did some like elective. It felt a lot more like public school, which is fine, but it's not the point of our program. And we tried really hard to kind of integrate, we would do those classes and then I would give them challenges like, hey, this week, your challenge is to do a nature sit spot 3 times, in the week or something, right? Go find a spot in nature, and nature can just mean your front yard. That's okay. For some of our kids, they live in the city and there was no getting out. And so I was like, nature can also mean sitting in your window and looking out the window. Or if you have a plant that's growing in your house, right? Like a house plant, that can be your nature. And we were lucky that we have families that believe in that stuff and that have, frankly, the time. A lot of our homeschool families have at least one parent who's not working, who had the time and the capacity and the passion to make sure their kids were still connecting to nature. But at this point in the year, even that, the kids are like, we had an art class the other day, and I was showing some of the kids continuous line drawings, and the next YouTube video to play was just like somebody painting on a rock. And they were like, can we just watch that video? And I had a moment of weakness in my very pregnant state, and teacher at the end of the year said, I was like, sure, let's just watch that video. And they were like, this is great. I just like watching this video. This is so relaxing. And so all of us at this point in the year are like, yeah, it's okay. We'll just watch a YouTube video, because even they're kind of like, what do we do outside, by ourselves with our, they've kind of done a lot of what they could do in their own little backyard space. So it has lost its effectiveness, which is why we're working very hard to make sure that we can develop a program for next year that can be on site, at camp, at school, safely as much as we possibly can. And And I know a lot of other schools are doing the same, or trying to make it so that the best version of their program can run next year. But I truly hope that people recognize how effective things like letting them play outside can be. So yeah, I think, you know, for folks who, it's so funny, I'm so used to having kids who I can see and they raise their hands when I ask a question.
Right.
But for folks who still have some time for the rest of this year, especially with school, you know, I can't recommend enough just like how much of an impact it makes to get outside. Like I was saying, even if you're outside is a tiny little patch of backyard or front yard, or is looking out the window. There's some really, really solid research that shows that people in hospitals, they've done some great research studies on this, people in hospitals who have a window facing a tree recover faster than people who don't have a tree. And it's like, and they, you know, it's a solid study. It eliminates all other factors. Exposure to something like even a tree out your window is good for you. And if you're a kid on this call and you're a student, it might feel kind of crazy, but it will make you feel better in the long run. If you're like, oh, I just had 2 hours of Zoom, take 10 minutes and just go stare at a tree. Again, it'll feel crazy, but after like 3 minutes, it will feel less crazy. And after 5 minutes, it'll feel really good. There's like actual chemical things happening in your brain when you are exposed to sunlight and green trees and fresh air and oxygen in those ways, that you'll come back in for your next Zoom class and be like, all right, I feel a little bit better, right? Drink some water, stretch your legs, look at a tree. So I think the littlest things will go a very, very long way. I mentioned nature sit spots, which sounds like a little kid thing, but I highly recommend it for everybody ages 5 to 100. So like what I just said, but go find a space where you can just sit. And I'll only let you bring your phone to set a timer. But set a timer for yourself for at least 3 minutes and just let yourself be completely silent and use all of your senses, except maybe taste, to experience the world around you, right? Listen for birds, close your eyes at some points and see if you can hear like the furthest sound away, then see if you can hear the closest sound to you. And just try to kind of recalibrate in connection with nature, and it will make you feel a million times better and prepare you for getting through what is hopefully not too much more of this school year. And then make sure you spend your summer getting outside as much as you can. You know, sunblock, hats, don't be dangerous, but get outside, breathe in that fresh air, because if there's any chance that next year you have to kind of go back to doing some of this in this way, you're going to want all of the nature ammunition you can get. And advocate for yourself as a student, and advocate for your child as a parent, to say, you know, my kid needs 30 minutes to go sit outside in our yard before the next class, and make that a priority so that you can integrate those things, and keep your eye out for great programs that are going to try to bring some of that nature to you. Like I said, I'll share those with Chuck as I can find a whole bunch online.
All right. Thank you so much. I think you might need a nature break.
I know. I'm gonna stop reading at home. That's our bonus tip. Don't let the rain stop you. There's no such thing as bad weather, only bad clothing. And when it's hot, just go outside. What's the worst that's gonna happen is you're gonna get wet, and it'll cool you off. Just saying. The kids in our school play outside no matter the weather. So get out there and enjoy it.
All right. Thank you very much, Kira. Thanks for doing this.
Thanks, guys.